It's easy to get into the habit of thinking that you can always sort out the exposure in Photoshop, especially if you shoot in RAW. But getting it right in camera can save you time adjusting your images and even give you better quality results. For most landscape shots, I'd recommend that you start by using aperture priority exposure mode. This will give you complete control over the depth of field in your images, and the camera will select the shutter speed. But this doesn't mean that you have to let the camera take over completely though, as even the best metering systems don't always get the correct exposure every time. So let's take a look at how you can take control in aperture priority mode for well-exposed landscapes. The key to this is using the histogram display to assess the exposure, and the exposure compensation control to adjust the exposure. Before we take a shot, we need to make sure that the camera is set up so that the histogram gives you an accurate idea of the exposure of your image. Even if you're shooting in RAW format, the histogram shown on the back of your camera is taken from a JPEG, not the RAW. So for an accurate idea of the exposure of the RAW file, you should remember to set the picture style to a standard or neutral setting, rather than one such as landscape that will increase the contrast and saturation of your shots. The other setting that can affect the histogram is the white balance. So I'd suggest setting it to a preset value such as daylight or sunny if you're shooting in normal daylight. That way you can be sure that it will give consistent results. With the camera set up, I'm ready to start shooting. Now I've set an aperture to f11 to keep the whole scene sharp. And if I frame a shot so that it contains mostly sky and take a shot, you'll see that the histogram is bunched to the left. This indicates that the image is underexposed. So to correct this, I need to increase the exposure by setting the exposure compensation to +1. If I take another shot, containing mostly land, the histogram is shifted towards the right, indicating that it's overexposed. So, to keep as much detail as possible, I need to set the exposure compensation to -1. In an ideal situation, you want the histogram to be evenly spread across the whole graph. But in the real world, you'll often have to choose between detail in the highlights or in the shadows. It's generally easier to get detail back in the shadows rather than the highlights. So I tend to be more concerned about the right-hand end of the graph than the left when I'm shooting landscapes.